This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 232.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. I am your host, Ramsey Majaba. Thank you for coming on again. Today's guest, his name is Damian Tomasino. He's very active on LinkedIn, so if you're in the sales engineering world, you might have already heard of him. He was on Patrick Pasang and Lydia, I'm not going to say her last name, live stream. And they discussed a lot of stuff. Today, we wanted to focus on Damian himself, his role as a solo, or I don't know if he's a solo, but he's a principal SE at a startup, what his role is and how he gets that done. Also, he has a bunch of side hustles. So I wanted to talk about that, how he manages his time, how it works as a principal SE. What is a principal SE? How it works as a principal SE at a startup. What is his job? What is his role? So we discuss all that and so much more. So without further ado, let's just jump into the show. Good afternoon, Damian. How are you doing?
I'm good. And yourself?
I'm doing well. Excited to meet you. You've been a busy man lately, so I'm happy to have you on the show. Thank you for making the time.
Yes, thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. So the topic of conversation today is how to change diapers and stay sane as a sales engineer. I think that was a suggestion from Paul Georgie on your Slack channel. Maybe we don't start there, but maybe we can talk about that. We'll start off by maybe you can introduce yourself, who you are and what you do, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So by day, I am a principal security engineer for Feroot Security, a Canadian startup in the cybersecurity space. And by night, I am the head SE, as I like to say, for Cyber Informants, which is a small startup we're growing around a community for pre-sales in cybersecurity.
Okay, Cyber Informants, right?
Yes.
Nice. All right. What is a principal SE? We'll start there.
It's a good question. I believe it means that I get more tasks than the senior.
Okay. So it's basically the next step for someone who's looking to move up without going into a management role.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that I did working with Feroot is helping to kind of establish a career path for the SE track, right? And given the size that we are, we're not ready for a titled SE leader, given our size. Right. So to show some career progression, what we did was we decided on sales engineer, senior sales engineer, and then principal sales engineer. And this way we have a nice career path for those that choose to move up in the individual contributor role. And then from there, you can kind of pivot into the management layer as we continue to build that out.
Okay. I know other companies also have like staff and senior staff. You guys kind of forewent that, just too many layers.
Yeah, too many layers. I do think that when you're, the size of VMware, those things make sense. And if things like, senior sales engineer 1, senior sales engineer 2, there's like subsequent layers, but I haven't seen that really much in cyber. No one has truly hit that level of scale that we needed to go that deep.
Yeah. I feel like I work for a big company, 15,000 employees, and they still don't have that staff and senior staff. So I think it's specific to some companies, but it's not. It's I guess it's a path forward for some folks.
Yes.
But yeah, that's pretty cool. Canadian startup.
Yes.
Okay. Is it different from an American startup, or is it just Canadian in front of it?
Just happen to be based out of Canada, so we're out of Toronto. But ironically, there is no physical offices. We're a completely remote organization. So we have people all over the US, a couple of folks in Canada as well.
And how long have you been with that company?
It was just over a year. So I actually celebrated 1 year with them last month.
Nice. So the reason I'm asking is it's hard enough to get onboarded as a sales engineer when you can go in person and talk to people. How has your experience been with virtual onboarding? And like big part of our job is connecting, building relationships. How has that been going?
Yeah, it's actually been great. So I'm probably in a little bit of a unique position here. I was primarily a remote employee before it was COVID cool, as I like to say.
Yeah.
And I'm used to more of the remote culture and the remote style of work. So the last company that I worked for, even though I, traveled a lot, went to their physical corporate office on the West Coast, I was a remote employee for 4 years, right? And just
Okay.
worked from home when I wasn't traveling and made it happen just like that. So kind of going into the company I work for Feroot, not much of a change, right? I kind of knew what onboarding looked like. Actually, I did most of my own onboarding because I was their first SE hire. So I built most of the technical onboarding as I was onboarding into more of the company HR process.
Okay.
And then we used that as a handbook to essentially onboard additional employees, both on the development and sales side of the house too. So it's actually been pretty good in terms of knowing what to look for, kind of the things that you need in a culture of a company to stay connected. And we have a couple of things in the works in terms of planning some physical meetups of a company. We're still pretty small, about 20, 25 people. So we're small enough where we can bring the whole company together in one location. So
Okay. So it's not 25 SEs, it's 25 people in total.
25 people, yeah.
Right. Okay. And so I would talk me through your thought process when you not only did you need to onboard, you actually need to build the onboarding. What was the
Yes.
first thing you thought of? Like personally, I would cry for a bit and then I actually get to work. So if you skip the crying part, what was the first thing you actually thought about while trying to
Yeah.
build an onboarding process?
Yeah, I love this question. So, any role that I've taken as an SE in the last decade in cyber, let's say, I always approach it looking at a way to automate my role to the point where I'm making myself obsolete. It's always the mindset I go into it with. Now, obviously, you can't automate everything being an SE. There's always going to be some, human interaction. But if you use that mindset going into it, anytime you do things like onboarding or training or learning like a net new product from an acquisition, if you're taking really good notes, building uh, almost like bite-sized learning for those that come after you, you start to develop this pattern where it doesn't matter if you move on to another role, another company, or you grow a team. There's always something left. You're kind of like leaving behind this little legacy of here are the different pieces that got put in place to help those that come after you. So having that mindset, that's just how I approached it going into Feroot, right? Sat down, old school notebook and a pen. And as we went through, guys, give me the product demo, walk me through what a POC looks like if you've done them before, tell me all about the HR handbook essentially. How do you onboard people into the company? So as I walk through and I make notes, I just am and identifying, okay, gap here, this makes sense. Let's change some language here to make it easier. And it doesn't work for everybody, but having those small tweaks kind of put in place when I'm done onboarding, I now have kind of like an employee handbook both for myself and as a quick win to give back to the leadership team and say, hey, you guys had a Google Doc. Here's V2 of that and all the things that I found along the way.
So it is a small company. It's not overwhelming by any means in terms of the size of the company. But
Right.
I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, because assumptions are usually not a good thing, but there are probably salespeople that were hired before you. Is that accurate, or were you hired before salespeople?
I was number two. So there was a sales leader that was hired before me
Okay.
who had been working with the company, and then I was the first technical hire. So
Okay.
we were at that cusp of founder-led sales, right?
Okay.
And then you're starting to transition out of founder-led sales into handing it off to a direct sales team. So as the first technical hire, I worked with the sales leader, and we started putting together here's what a POC looks like. Here's what a structured demo looks like. So there was some really good customer stories and there were some really good learnings that were put in place and kind of written out before I got there. But we started to work through how does that translate into actual technical selling after I got hired.
And there were also probably product management or product people who create the product.
We have a CTO who is in charge of our product, and I actually work really closely with him. So you asked me earlier, what does a principal do? Well, one of the things that I'm taking more responsibility of in a principal role is actually working more closely with product, right? In kind of being, I don't want to say a full product manager, but helping kind of fill the gap of product management, where instead of having to go from SE to product manager to dev, and have that, middle path there, I actually am a direct bridge to our development team now, where we can give them direct feedback and requirements straight from customers and help translate that into user stories much faster.
Okay. The reason I'm asking all this is I've worked with SEs. I've had clients as SEs who worked as the first SE at a company. And generally speaking, when you're coming in, you're not late, but the CEO, CTO, they've been selling the product for a while. They have their own way of doing things, right?
Yep.
Which may not be the best sales engineering thing, but it works for them because they're the founders, and selling as a founder seems to be easier than selling as an SE because they know the product, they know the problem, they know the product. There's a reason behind the story that they started this company.
Right.
How did you, they had bad habits. Did you feel like, and I don't want you to badmouth anybody, obviously, but there would be pressure from CEO, CTO for an SE and a salesperson to work exactly the way that they worked.
Yeah. There's always that. It is always, hey, here's what's worked for me, and here's what worked in the past to get the first couple of customers that we had. I think it would be foolish to ignore the sales motions that they've gone through and what's worked for them in the past, because there are learnings there, right? There is something that they said, there's something that they did, there's a motion that they took that closed that business, and there is something to be learned out of that. And I think if you take anything from it, it's not the sales process that is important, it's the story, right? What story did they tell to those first customers? What was the key use case that then you can reference that came out of that? And then how do you work that into your own unique dynamic as a sales team instead of an executive team?
Yeah, their stories are usually amazing. I mean, there was a pain that they saw, they probably felt that pushed them to solve a problem, which is what they can share and what customers would resonate with. And I think everybody should use it. The issue that I see that SEs, especially like brand new SEs, imagine someone in your position, but they've never been an SE before. I've seen that happen, and they're trying to tell the CEO, CTO what they should be doing as sales engineers, but they don't have the experience to actually, or the know-how to tell them how to do it. So how did you, if you changed something in the process, did you get pushback? And if you did, how did you manage that? And how did you convince everybody that it's the best way forward?
Yeah, it's, I think, less about pushback and more about trial and error, right? So I have seen it too, where you have either first SE in an organization or maybe even second SE in an organization. They come in and they've got a lot of experience in the industry, and they feel that something they've done at maybe a larger company is going to work really well in this new company, and they're eager to prove themselves. And startup life is a very different beast, right, than working for a larger organization. And I think just trying to be heavy-handed with it causes a lot of friction. I think that's the part that you really need to watch for. I don't think there's so much about pushback, but it's more about how you phrase it, right? So let's say one of the things I wanted to do was build a POC framework that I know is something that has been very successful and will be successful as we continue to grow and scale as a larger organization, right? You use it in a very loose way when you're a young company. So, the whole concept of a framework versus a playbook is that the framework is more of a set of guardrails, right? It's not prescriptive in nature. Whereas a playbook would be a lot more do this, say that, do this, say that, to move from one place to another. So I think coming at it from the perspective of you have these broader artifacts that you can use as a sales engineer to get going, use them to test your theory, use them to see if it's something that will work and will make sense, right, for the organization, for the individual that you're trying to work with inside that organization. And you'll start to find kind of like the snowball effect, right, where you have a couple of wins, a couple of data points, and then you can make your case, right? Then you can say, hey, I've used this or I've tried this and this resonated with our customer. Or you get the inverse where you say, I tried this and I fell on my face and it just didn't work. So let's try something different.
So this is interesting. Framework versus playbook. This is actually the first time I've heard someone differentiate them. How long did it take you to figure that out? That there is an actual difference between framework versus playbook.
Several companies worth of time. It's something that you don't often see. Is something that's put a lot of time in cybersecurity. Oftentimes we have some sales training. There's a lot of sales enablement, but having a defined playbook is not something that you frequently see, right? And there's some really good sales methodologies out there. Like a lot of people like the challenger sales method. Sandler's another big one that's out there. So I've seen a lot of training around these, but using a playbook versus a framework is something I think we're going to start to see a lot more of, specifically because people buy very differently these days, right? There's information everywhere. You have access to a lot of different sets of peers and communities and what we call dark social these days. That type of information in a buyer's hands changes the way they're naturally going to buy. And having a rigid playbook in a large, complex deal cycle doesn't always work in Cyberland, right? And this is why there's a differentiation between playbooks and frameworks.
Okay, that makes sense. Is there a training that you enjoyed more than others? Like you were talking about Challenger, Sandler. Did you attend any training that you gravitated towards?
Can't really say that there's one that I like more than another. I will say that as part of what we're doing with Cyber Informants, we did spend time building our own framework because it's something that we've put together after years of doing this and talking to customers from super small one-person shops all the way through to the Fortune 50, especially on a global scale. We've had enough battle experience to then bring all those learnings back and develop this framework so that we have a guide each time we do these roles, each time we enter a new organization. We can kind of take that with us and work through it and know that it's something that's repeatable.
And so, general question, like, as the first SE at a startup, what are some challenges that you faced that were exciting to solve?
Oh man, there's so many good ones.
The first one that popped into your mind. Let's go with that.
Putting a POC process in place. I think that one is always my favorite. Right? Is when you're in the mode of doing founder-led sales, you often don't need any kind of rigor around it. Right? It's conversation. Do you have product market fit? Are we solving a real pain point? And then whatever you need to do to get the deal over the line, right? Those are the first 24 deals you do as a founder. And then as you transition and you start to build out a sales team and you're ready to take that step and kind of hand the reins over a little bit, then you need to start putting some process and structure in place. And as part of that, having not even a rigid POC process or a rigid POC framework, but having something on paper that you can follow to be repeatable is kind of the first step to putting pieces in place while you're hiring a team.
So why is, like, it sounds like you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, it's easier for a founder to sell than for a sales team to sell. Did I hear that right? Did I misunderstand something? Or
in the initial early days of selling for a startup, yeah, absolutely, because it's their vision, it's their sales motion. They understand the product really well. They're the ones that had this idea and they're trying to kind of fill a need in the market. It's always going to be easier for a founder to kind of deliver that. It's only when you find that real product market fit and that you can have a repeatable sales process that you can start to hand that off to a sales team. There are certain markers that have to be met in order for that transition to happen.
Okay. And like, the opposite question, I guess, is there a challenge that you faced that you had a hard time solving so far?
Yeah, but I will tell you, there is no solution for this. There just aren't enough hours in the day. If I could, if wishing made it so, and I could make more hours in a day, that is always the biggest challenge. And I think that's true whether we're the first SE at an organization, or we work for a 15,000 person company.
Well, then let me rephrase that. Is there a solvable problem that you haven't solved yet?
Let's see. I would say for us, coming up with all the key things that we want in a product to get it to market, and then say, hey, we've got all these things, whether it's versus a competitor or just like ideas in our mind. It kind of goes back to the just, time is our biggest enemy thing, but solving it takes, a lot of different pieces. You need a good set of sales, you need repeatable customers, you need expansion. And, these are the pieces that drive the ability to hire more developers and scale a product. So it's kind of like a circular argument of you need one to fuel the other, but it is something that you start to find a really good rhythm to over time.
Okay. And like, speaking of time, you mentioned that by day you're principal SE, by night you're a cyber informant. I don't know if I said that right, but,
yes.
you have a startup that's that's called Cyber Informant. How are you managing your time that you're able to do both? And I think for some reason, I think you have children, mainly because of Paul's comment. So how are you managing all that?
Very carefully.
Yeah.
I do a lot of batch creation, and it's how I kind of keep myself sane, right? So on the weekends, spend a lot of time writing and focused on, pulling together thoughts for things like LinkedIn, creating some content. I do have 3 kids, young kids actually. So when they go to sleep, I can kind of take advantage of that time to work through some of the content that we want to put out and make available through Cyber Informants. So it is definitely a rigid process to try and balance all of that time in there. But I will say this too: I am not a really big believer in the like hustle and grind culture. Right? There has to be balance. Family first and foremost, right? I do not feel guilty when we take a vacation or there's downtime or spending time with the kids, and a lot of people will be like, oh, I could be working on this or I should be working on that. I don't get that kind of pressure. I know when I should be doing my job, when I should be focused on cyber informants, and when I should be focused on my kids.
Yeah. So when we go on vacation with my wife, the only way I don't feel like that, like I should be working, is to have time set aside that, hey, I'm going to work for an hour when one of the kids is asleep, but the rest of the time it's just everybody else's, and that takes off a lot of guilt of either because I'm working, I'm guilty because I'm not hanging out with the family, or when I'm hanging out with the family, I'm not guilty because I'm not working. And what prompted you to start? What is Cyber Informant actually? Maybe you start there.
Yeah, sure. So for Cyber Informants, we kind of saw this gap in the marketplace where, over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of, some call them boot camps, some call them training, but I just call them communities. There's been a lot of communities that have popped up in the broader tech or sales ecosystem, especially around SaaS startups for salespeople specifically. So SDRs, account managers, account executives. You're starting to see a lot spring up now around customer success and how that whole angle works. But there's never really been anything for sales engineer. And I know we also have Pre-Sales Collective, which is a big thing that James started, which has been awesome. And I know he's got kind of a broad scope for all sales engineers, which is awesome. But before I even joined Pre-Sales Collective as well, the focus has always been for us on cybersecurity, right? I've lived in this industry for over a decade, and there's just so much domain knowledge that you need inside of the pre-sales role for cybersecurity. And there's also such considerations like things like DPAs or, negotiating MSAs specifically around, whether it's data confidentiality and things of that nature.
What's DPAs and what's MSAs?
Oh yeah, sorry. Industry habit. DPA is a data processing agreement. Like, what kind of data can I collect? Where can I store it? Where can I send it? And MSA for master service agreement. Usually the overarching legal contract that governs all the things that you do, product or service.
Okay. All right. And so you're doing that. You're also writing a book, which you're publishing by chapter, right? If I'm following correctly.
Yeah, I'm working on it publicly. So sometimes it's a chapter, sometimes it's a paragraph, but at the moment we're trying to go chapter by chapter. Yes.
So how is that? Like, why did that? I understand the community. That's the whole reason I started We the SEs, because there wasn't anything out there for SEs. But why write a book in addition to creating a community, in addition to being a father, in addition to having a full-time job? And I'm making it
Mm.
sound like a lot because it is a lot.
Yeah, I mean it is for sure, and sometimes it's insanity, and other times it's a labor of love, right? The book was actually something that came about as a way for me to talk about a problem space because the startup that I work for, Feroot, is in a very new market, right? And it's in a market not just of application security, but specifically in the client side space.
Yeah.
And for many people who don't know what this is, right, this is around front end security. And this is new for a lot of folks from a risk perspective, from a, how do I do something about that? And I've never really been a fan of like traditional marketing tactics, right? So if you think about like paid advertising or let's write a white paper, look, there's a time and a place for it, and I have a lot of friends who are marketers, and I have nothing but respect for what they do. But as somebody who's also has a very technical background, right, and I want to contribute to that demand generation and getting something out there that we can leverage for not just sales but conversations with the people we're talking to. I wanted something that was more focused on the problem than the product, and that's kind of what led me to writing this book, or starting writing this book, and doing it in public because I want others to read it and contribute and follow along the way. And coincidentally, two of the folks that we were talking to from a sales perspective have actually become really good friends who have been providing some advice as part of input into the book too. So you build a lot of relationships out of it.
Okay. In terms of like going back to Cyber Informant, you have you're building a community you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so we have a private Slack community specifically for cybersecurity pre-sales professionals. So
And
we're yes.
and cybersecurity professional Ramsey here on his own.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
appreciate the invite. Yeah, it's I'm enjoying like watching everybody and kind of creeping around and watching people actually conversate in security terms. It's a different language, but why? I guess so. Yeah, that's the question. Why?
Yeah, so it's part of I'm gonna go sales jargony here on you, but it's part of
Right.
a three-pronged approach.
Okay.
Right? All right. So we're trying to make a really big impact in the cybersecurity industry, again, specifically to pre-sales and those who want to get into the role, which I honestly think many people don't really know exists, candidly, right?
Yep.
So we have three different pieces to this um, startup or cyber informants. We have something called Scout, and Scout is all about helping individuals scout out their first role. So it's knowledge about the pre-sales role. It's how do I find my first cybersecurity pre-sales job? How do I negotiate compensation and some of the challenges around equity? A lot of people are not used to doing that, and that's really a really big component, especially in cyber. So it's all these resources to help them navigate getting into a role. And we also maintain a list of pre-sale jobs in cybersecurity for anyone to browse. And we've offered, to several people inside the community, hey, if you find a role, or if it's, we have a connection somewhere, we're happy to make a warm introduction for you, as opposed to just, blindly submitting applications. So we're trying to help build, the supply of people kind of coming into cybersecurity pre-sale by arming them with the right educational materials to take that first step into the role. And that doesn't always mean, someone who is a sales engineer that's going to go into cyber. It might mean somebody who's been in the industry a really long time as a practitioner and then wants to change over to the sales side of the house. Or maybe somebody who's coming from out of the industry and is, taking time off or wants to get back in or is looking for their next role, and has never heard of pre-sales before and, wants to do something with cyber and pre-sales together. So there's a lot of paths into it, but that's really what we're building with Scout. And then once you have that role, then we've got the community, that Slack channel to, really support those who go into the role.
Okay.
Okay.
You this is very specific to cybersecurity engineering.
Yes.
What's the difference? What would you say the difference is between just SaaS and SE versus a cybersecurity SE?
Complexity. It just almost always, cybersecurity has these insane layers of complexity surrounding it. And that could be everything from, again, going back to contractual language. It could be the length of a POC. It could be the length of the sales cycle. I've worked for several different types of both startups and larger organizations on the vendor side, on the channel side, on the services side. And I would say across all of those in the last 10 years, the average sales cycle in our industry is around 9 months, if not longer.
Right.
Usually very long. When you look at some of the SaaS products of today, you have the freemium model, right? You can convert very quickly if it's a good fit. You have a product-led growth model. There's a lot of transactional type sales in the SaaS space. And I don't think one is right or one is wrong. Everybody has kind of like their own fit in what they're trying to sell and how they go about selling it or their go-to-market motion. But there is definitely just a layer of complexity in cyber that you don't find almost anywhere else.
I would say when you're talking about SaaS, everybody's trying to sell in the fastest motion possible, right? Whether you're a SaaS, whether you're cyber, whether you're networking, we all want to close the deal as fast as possible.
Yes.
But from a customer's perspective, there's a lot more risk involved in cyber versus a SaaS. The worst that could happen in SaaS is, hey, you spent a little bit of money on a product that you're not going to use. In cybersecurity, all your information could be lost, stolen. So it just, that in itself, I feel it adds a lot of complexity, which is what you were talking about.
Yes, absolutely. And then there's, the never-ending standards of governance frameworks and compliance requirements breathing down everybody's neck. So, you have product complexity, you have marketing complexity, and then you have complexity from both regulatory and governance requirements.
So if someone dreams about becoming a cybersecurity SE and they're not from that industry, what's one piece of advice you would give them before they even start looking at a job?
I actually got this question on LinkedIn the other day. It's a great one. So, ironically, a lot of people are like, well, it's a sales role, and then there's a technical sales role, and I'm not really a technical person. I think that really scares a lot of people, right? And they look at it and they're like, oh my God, I don't know anything about technology. Now you want me to learn about cybersecurity on top of learning about technology? It's definitely an intimidating thing. And it was a post I did 2 days ago. What I had mentioned is cybersecurity and pre-sales in general, actually a lot less about the tech and significantly more about being a really good communicator and active listener, right? And if you want to get into any kind of sales role, those two things are more critical than anything else.
So why is it that I agree with that 100%, but for some reason I see people going into interviews and they're being asked to code things or integrate into different platforms or whatever. So if it's more important to be able to communicate something and we can learn the technology as we go, why is it that people still interview by asking people to code or integrate or do stuff like that? And I know you're not a manager for all these different companies, but I would like to hear your thoughts. I'm not blaming you.
I'm not feeling love over here. Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's we're coming at this from the perspective of there is a lot of history and to some degree legacy thinking involved in how we go about hiring people, right? It's a kind of a running joke in the cybersecurity industry that there is no such thing as an entry-level role. And if you ever see an entry-level role, the first requirement out of the gate is 5+ years of cybersecurity experience. And it's like, does no one read these before they post those job descriptions?
Yeah.
So I think that as part of the hiring process, a lot of people are like, oh, well, it's traditionally been a very technical role. We want really technical people, so we should have them do really technical activities. Yeah. And, part of that comes from legacy thinking. And also part of that comes from going back to Cyber Informants for a moment, because no one's ever helped them understand any better, right? If you had to, let's say you were promoted to an SE manager tomorrow and you were told to go out and build a whole new hiring program and hire 10 people, you'd have to come up with that all on your own. I'm not saying you're going to, but you got to come up with that all on your own. You got to look for resources and like, what does the interview process look like? How many people do I need to talk to? How many different checks should I have them pass? And that kind of a resource doesn't necessarily exist in sales engineering, especially at the management. So they're kind of just drawing from, well, how have I interviewed developers or how have we interviewed technical people in general in the past? And I think that's, kind of where this thinking comes from.
Yeah, I also think there is a big aspect of our role that is technical, right? Like if we're going to do a POC, we might have to integrate with other vendors or whatever it is that we need to do. So there's always that fear that, oh, this person's never going to learn that. But I've also I talk to SE managers who try to streamline the process altogether where they can just create an environment from one click on AWS, and the SE doesn't have to integrate anything. They just have to know the product and use that. So I guess there are different trains of thoughts, or they just don't have the time to invest in making a seamless, process. This stuff to do.
Yeah, I mean, again, everybody comes from, different experience and different background, but I think I at least am a very big believer in you can always be taught the tech, right? Yeah. There is always a resource, a guide, a training, a mentor. You can always be taught the tech. You cannot always be taught soft skills, right? Being personable, knowing how to run a discovery call and ask questions, knowing how to give a presentation without putting everybody to sleep. These are things that you really can't always teach people. Like it's something they have to learn on their own and practice and thrive. And I believe really strongly that, we shouldn't just judge people based on the technology that they know or the integrations or the code that they can write. We should judge them kind of like on the whole person and what is their potential.
Yeah. Well, that's the tough part. How do you know? Like you're meeting someone. I saw on your Slack, like someone had 7 meetings with a specific hiring company, and the comments were like, "That's too much." But how can you figure out someone's potential by meeting them once or twice?
Sometimes you can't, and sometimes it's experience and gut instinct, right? If you look at a traditional hiring process, right? Everybody submits a resume or an application or their LinkedIn profile, and you get screened by HR. You usually talk to technical or what's the word I'm looking for, and talent acquisition, right? You talk to somebody in talent acquisition, they do a quick phone screen. Typically, talk to the hiring manager. Yep. You talk to a peer on the SE team, and then it's some sort of panel interview. Right? It's a fairly standard process along the way. But most of the time, what they're judging you on is technical aptitude, right? They're not looking past the resume. They're not looking, oh, well, you had this past career, which is very different, right? Like maybe you were a teacher, right? Or you worked in the healthcare industry. There's a lot of skills in both of those fields that actually apply very beautifully to being an SE, right? Yeah. And that's the kind of looking past someone's resume and looking at their potential. Some of that you can do on paper, sure. Some of it you can get in just an hour conversation. Some of it is just experience and gut instinct.
So what are your thoughts around certifications? Like if someone's not in your industry and they want to break in, would you recommend one way to show that you have the potential is by doing certifications? But then again, that's time away from your family, time away from your current work to get those. What are your thoughts around that? Should people go after certifications?
Yeah, this is a hotly debated topic for sure. I think that there is value in certifications. However, I also think that to some degree we have taken it too far as an industry, right? There were a set of industry certifications, things like A+ for general IT, then you have Security Plus or Cloud Essentials is another big one. These are all really good entry-level certifications that help you set a foundational level in order to break into some of these roles. I think there is value in doing those because the cost of the materials have come down. The ability to run labs on your own is now in the cloud. It's at your fingertips, and even the exam prices themselves have come down. So making an investment in yourself really pays off from that perspective. Yeah. But saying you need this full list of things in order to just apply for a role and just get a phone screen with a lot of these companies, right? There's just, again, that mismatch between, checking the box and the HR filter versus having an applicable certification for the type of role you're going for.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. I would say, like, if you're an actor or a teacher and trying to get into sales engineering, and you get an AWS cloud practitioner, which is the easiest of the certifications, it just shows that you have potential.
Right.
And the reason I would say that is, at that point, because it becomes a competition between whoever's, like, the two people applying, or how many people applying. And if that's a differentiator, might as well have it, especially if it's easier to get.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it also goes to showing, hiring managers that you are willing to invest in yourself
Yep.
and not just be someone who's like expecting everything to be handed to them, right? By all means, investing in yourself and having a growth mindset is something that's really important to being successful in your career for the long term, because the minute you get comfortable, you become stagnant.
Yep, I agree with that. All right, Damian, it's time to move on to the not so fire round. These are the same 4 questions I ask almost every guest, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. Question number 1: what do you love about sales engineering in general? Because it seems that you're a sales engineer within hours, and you're working on improving as a sales engineer after hours as well. So why? What's pushing you in? Why do you love it?
Oh, I love talking to customers. There is no better feeling in the world, whether it's a demo conversation or, talk after the sales motion, just being able to connect with people on a human level and really understand what drives them, what motivates them, what are they enjoying about their current role. That level of connection is amazing.
So, unrelated to the not so fire round, if off the top of your head, what do you think your superpower is as a sales engineer?
Taking really, really technical concepts and distilling them down into clear language.
Nice. Okay. I'll take that. All right. So what would you change about the role? That's question number 2.
What would I change about the role? Oh boy.
Other than higher salaries.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I don't know if it's something I would necessarily change about the role, but maybe change more about the process of going into the role. I do think that hiring for SEs is long overdue for a disruption, right? Whether it's an associate level, having a career path, again, kind of going back to this whole, the HR checkbox thing. If I could change the way that we go about, screening and hiring and training or supporting sales engineers within cybersecurity, that's what I would say.
Do you feel like SEs should have some life experience before becoming SEs? Like
absolutely.
Okay. Just because
absolutely.
When we talk about associate level SEs, I imagine people straight out of university going into that SE university, whatever company has, but they don't have any life experience and they've never been a customer. They don't know what it's like. I have conflicting feelings about that, whether it's a disservice to those people or not.
Yeah, I actually am on the side of it is a disservice, and I'll tell you why. Because I think the core of being an SE is actually understanding a customer's business, not just the problem that they have. And if you want to understand business in general, you need to know what are procurement cycles like for companies of all different sizes. How do you negotiate legal contracts? How do you work with multiple stakeholders in an organization versus a single? Like, these are things you fundamentally see as a sales engineer, but you'll also experience that in a lot of different roles, right? Working for big organizations. And having that life experience going into a sales engineering role will actually make your life 10 times easier.
I told my previous boss that every SE should do a cycle in support.
Yes.
But now I'm thinking, like, maybe they should do a cycle also in procurement.
Yes.
Where
if I could wave a magic wand, I actually feel like there is a 6-month training window, right? Where each month for those 6 months, you rotate through a different part of the department, right? You spend a month in legal, you spend a month in finance, you spend a month in customer success, month in sales, and a month in product. And you come out of it and it's just like, man, you've got a really good view.
That's the problem that irks me with especially larger companies where they're onboarding new SEs. All they're focusing on is the technology and not even how the customer uses the technology. It's just, this is the technology. So what? Who cares? That's not part of the onboarding. So whenever you hire your first SE, or I don't know how many SEs you have, But whenever you hire your next SE, hopefully, I guess you do what you're just talking about.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Other than your book, and other than, actually, you didn't tell me what's the website. What's the website for Cyber Informants?
So we have cyberinformants.com is the main site. We have our ecosystem up there for the 3 different things that we offer to support SEs. And for the book, if you want to look up the book, it's called monsterinthebrowser.com.
Okay. So beyond those 2, which I'm, by the way, on Cyber Informants right now, I'll take a look at it after we're done. Beyond those 2, is there a resource you would recommend to a fellow SE?
Yeah, what James is doing over at the Pre-Sales Collective, his podcast is amazing. Like the guests that they have, the topics that they cover, it's a phenomenal resource.
Nice. Okay. And the last question of the not so fire round, is there a habit you're working on today to improve either in your personal or professional life?
Yes. Making more active use of my calendar. And this was also another really good LinkedIn post, right? Is I live and die by the calendar in my personal life and my professional life. And it's a running joke between me and my wife, got to get something done. Not on the calendar, does not exist in my world. Right. It's just, you have to find that balance. And part of finding that balance is making sure you don't miss something along the way. So being very aggressive with my calendar and making sure that, I'm making time for mental health, for business, for work, for family. Very important.
I don't know how many times my wife tells me, I have a dentist appointment today. I'm like, no, you don't. It's like, no, I do. Said, no, it's not on my calendar. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
No, you do not have an appointment because I'm busy that time. All right. So we've covered the not so fire round. Damian, is there any question you were hoping I was going to ask you and I didn't today?
No, I mean, we covered a lot of things. Just one thing I would really touch on is, you and I definitely put out a lot of content on LinkedIn. I think that one thing that I'd mention is, I even was talking to Patrick about this on his podcast too. Just when you are sitting, it's like, how do you come up with all this content? And maybe that was something I hope we touch on a little bit too. Is, it's not really about coming up with content. It's just going back to what you asked earlier, being able to talk to customers, talk to peers in the space, having the community. Like, these are real challenges that we deal with day in and day out. And it's just about how do you take that and amplify it so that you can help more people.
Nice. Damian, if people want to reach out and connect with you, where can they do that?
LinkedIn. I am all over it. I'm always available. DM's open. Anyone can hit me up there.
That's perfect. Damian, all the links that we discussed today will be in the show notes. I'm not sure which show this is. I'll say in the intro and the outro. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. And we're done. Thank you, Damian, for coming on. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate you being here. What are your thoughts? Do you think you'd want to be a principal SE or an SE at a startup? What do you think the role of a principal SE? What's the difference between a normal SE? Are there any other roles within your organization that have different titles like staff, principal, senior staff, senior staff, senior squared staff? I don't know what they are. There's a lot of different titles. So let me know. I would love to know the ranks at different companies. And yeah, do you want to do a side hustle? How are you going to manage that without being burnt out and sucked into hustle culture? All these questions are popping into my mind right now. So yeah, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. So I'm going to sign off right now. All right. This is me signing off.